Or professionally. We're even dealing with this new abnormal we've been sold every single day in 2020.
Police are preparing to launch their aerial arsenal as part of a crackdown on COVID rule breakers,
making sure skate parks and playgrounds remain empty, and for those who head to the park, a mask is a must.
Authorities in Melbourne, Australia have announced the release of high-tech surveillance drones that will be utilized to identify individuals outside not wearing masks, as well as scan for cars that are in violation of curfew. Previous measures over the last few weeks have included drivers being asked to produce papers at certain highway checkpoints just to get to work, with only one person per household allowed to leave their house, limited to one outing a day, and permitted to pick up essentials as long as it's within 5 kilometers of their home. The consequences for being in violation of any of these aforementioned transgressions, whether that be the inability to produce papers to justify your departure from home, being outside without wearing a mask, or disobeying the strict 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. curfew, will result in a massive fine. Furthermore, to enforce these restrictions and government control over the people, Australia's Prime Minister announced on August 18th that the corona vaccine would be compulsory, with the exception of those with medical exemptions. A spokesperson added that in order to incentivize Australians to get vaccinated, they would consider a no jab, no pay policy, meaning that if you don't get the inoculation, you could be barred from returning to work.
I suspect the majority of Australians will get vaccinated. There needs to be some sort of incentive stick, perhaps, through the current programs, including no jab, no pay.
I'm incredibly curious how Australians under lockdown are feeling right now. How are you feeling about the possibility of no jab, no pay, especially within the context of a speedy and rush vaccine? Do you believe that your right to freedom is outweighed by potential health risks? Do you believe that once the public health risk, whether real or exaggerated, is dialed back, that these tyrannical and draconian measures will be dialed back in tandem? Yes. Or will they remain as the new normal for the foreseeable future? Australians aren't the only ones in this boat. New Zealand appears to be on board with this worldwide authoritarian takeover as well. Even though a court ruled just yesterday that New Zealand's government broke the law when it told residents to stay at home during the early days of Corona, Auckland, New Zealand's most populated city, still remains under a level 3 lockdown, which means there's a stay-at-home order except for essential personal movement. And much like Australia, New Zealand has incentivized its citizens to comply. And recently, when the Prime Minister was asked what happens if citizens refuse to be tested for the virus, she replied that they actually cannot refuse, that they will be held by the government in a government quarantine facility for the designated period of 14 days, and should they refuse to be tested after that 14 days, they will be held by the government for another 14 days. So, okay, what about your job? What about your children? What happens to your livelihood and family during the period when your government holds you against your will in a facility until you comply?
As part of our overall national response to this new outbreak, I am now directing medical officers of health that all cases, confirmed cases, are to be managed in a quarantine facility.
New Zealand and Australia aren't the only countries experiencing medical tyranny or martial law disguised as quarantine. And let me just ask, does the propagated public health risk justify what's happening in these countries? And are you willing to comply to say nothing until your country ends up like theirs? Are you willing to stay silent until you have drones buzzing around your head, scanning your face, watching your every move, and making sure you're wearing a mask? These pressing questions bring me to my original point, the art of saying no on an individual basis. It appears that New Zealand, Australia, and other countries have missed the opportunity to say no as individuals. In order to stand up for their personal freedoms and liberties, they're going to have to collectively come together and do so. And that seems real hard to do when you're only allowed to leave your house once a day for groceries. None of these draconian measures they've implemented during lockdown are going to end until the people themselves end it. But in countries like my own, the United States, I still believe we have the opportunity to say no. But the problem is, most of us are waiting for someone else to say it for us, especially in the form of a politician. Most of us don't want to be the first person to say no within our own family